Now when you're about to take down the M9, and again this applies, as I said earlier, in the real steel, you're going to need to press down on this small button just above the trigger guard on the right side of the gun in order to actuate the switch on the left side. So, this is what we're doing. As I mentioned, you're pushing down on the button and you can see the little nub has pushed forward. You then drop this lever, like so, and it can't go any further. You can then release the button on the right side of the gun, and with the magazine out, it has to be out. If it's not out, it won't slide off. You slide the barrel forward and off. And now you can see basically the internal workings of the gun. You can see the spring that I mentioned. And of course this would also give you access to the barrel. One thing that is slightly different from the real deal, the real steel, is the fact that you do have to do some minor disassembly in order to actually pull out the barrel. You can clean the barrel without having to do any disassembly, but to actually pull the barrel fully out, the only way we could do it was to fully just pop this little plate off. There are 2 springs on either side, right here, and once that's done, then you can remove the barrel. Not a big deal, but you could lose those little springs, so if you decide to do it, be careful. One thing that's quick and easy, though, is pulling out the guide rod. You see there's a little foot here, and what we found was the easiest to do was to actually, you're basically going to be pushing down on, there's a little plate in here, and you're actually going to be pushing the barrel down. And again, I mean, you're going to be juggling a few different things at once. Once you do that, that will allow you to pop the guide rod out, and if you wanted to either clean the guide rod or replace the spring or whatever you want to do. Now I'm going to flip this over so you can see what I was talking about, cleaning the barrel. Remember, this is now the barrel, which is almost floating free. But here, you can get an idea of what I meant. You can clean this thing, but pulling it out is going to be almost an impossibility. And note, in the real steel, you would actually pivot the barrel underneath the slide, meaning going down and popping it out that way. But because this is an airsoft version, there are a few, internal parts that just wouldn't allow that. Getting the guide rod back on is a pretty straightforward affair. You'll also notice, if you can see there, I mean, it's pretty well greased up, but there is some wear on that guide rod, which stripped off a little bit of the paint, and that's a result of having that grit and sand in there. So heads up, even the slightest amount of dirt or sand is really the enemy of this particular airsoft gun. I mean, that's true of any guns really, but especially because of how weak this guide rod is. Once you get a little bit of grit in there, it doesn't want to move. Now remember, there's a little foot, if you can see there, between my finger and this piece of metal right here. There's a little foot that needs to seat. If it doesn't seat, it will not reassemble properly. Okay, so you've got that guide rod back in, spring is back in, of course barrel is back into position. Now replacing the slide is just reversing what you did to get it off. It's very easy. You're going to make sure that the ridges are lined up properly, and you're just going to slide it on, and once it gets back to the hammer, you put the small lever back into position. You'll hear it click and lock, and then you're back in business. Of course, making sure the gun is unloaded and degassed. You can pull the trigger just to test it, and you're back in business. Now the magazine, there's nothing much about the magazine to talk about. It works well. We haven't had any leaking issues. It's pretty heavy. It's of course the heaviest part on the gun. This is where the gas reservoir is. You fill it by inserting the gas nozzle down and then just gassing it up until you hear it stop. One tip we found: green gas is in short supply. We haven't been able to get any of it, so we had to resort to propane actually. Now again, we're not necessarily recommending it because it's fairly dangerous. You're dealing with a flammable gas, but we have found that propane is an acceptable substitute for green gas. In fact, it is actually the same thing as green gas from what we understand. You will want to include some silicone lubricant though when you gas it up. We recommend doing it maybe every 2 to 4 magazines. Some people have said every, so many shots. We just do it every 2 to 4 magazines just to be safe. Once again, I want to expressly state that we are not endorsing use of propane. It's very dangerous. We don't want to see anyone get hurt. But we have used propane in this case because we were not able to get green gas. I'm sorry to say this, but we have to. If anyone gets hurt or injured as a result of using it, unfortunately, we will not be liable for that at all. It's a dangerous gas. I can't stress that enough. But it is a suitable substitute, and it yields good performance in the airsoft gun. So that's it. That's the TSD M9. Overall, we like it. We consider it average. There are some flaws. The fit and finish is average. Some of the switches, again, have paint that tends to fleck off and wear a little bit. Some people like that, thinks it gives character. There is a rail on the bottom for mounting an accessory, and of course that'll appeal to a lot of people. The heft of the gun is pretty decent, especially with the magazine in. It holds technically 25 shots, but we generally get about 23 or so. That's accomplished by simply pushing the spring all the way down, and then you can drop in the BBs there, or if you prefer, you can load them in one at a time. It is double stack, so you will see them staggered. That can pose kind of an issue sometimes because sometimes there'll be spaces in there. Might mean that you don't get a full 23 or 25 BBs. Not a big deal. Loading is pretty quick if you have a speed loader. We like that. Putting it into the gun is simple. It seats quite well. There's not a lot of slop, and it drops pretty well too, so you won't have really any issues with sticking. So overall, we would recommend the TSD M9. It's reasonably priced at around $60 to $80 depending on where you go. Its accuracy, as you'll see in our firing report, is actually very good. Its fuel efficiency gives us about 3 to 4 magazines depending on how quickly you're shooting, and we like it. We'll definitely carry it with us in skirmishes. Now, in conclusion, we had mixed feelings about the TSD M9, mostly good. There are some issues with the guide rod spring. Sometimes it's weak on the return. Of course, you're going to have to deal with a few intricacies with any airsoft gun, and overall we like it. Its accuracy is good. Its reliability on the whole is pretty good, though we do have some jams from time to time. We're going to experiment with replacing the guide rod spring and probably do an update later in the season. Its capacity is quite good, between 23-25 BBs, and its gas efficiency is also pretty good, giving us about 4 or so magazines before we had to fill up. As we mentioned earlier, we were using propane, which we strongly recommend extreme caution with when using. Our sources tell us that green gas and propane are actually basically the same thing. Green gas, of course, having silicone lubricant mixed in with it. If you decide to use propane, again, use extreme caution and try to add that silicone lubricant in there. You should be fine, assuming the slide is metal. If it is not, generally you might have some issues with the cracking slide, but on the M9 it seems to have done quite nicely. Overall, we like it. It's a very sturdy gun. There are some issues, of course, with the grit in the slide. Be aware of that. Be careful. Be prepared to clean it if you drop it in the dirt. Overall, we like it, and we would recommend the TSD M9. Now, due to some delays, our firing report is going to be following probably in about a week. But to give you a taste of what the M9 can do, we're going to give you a little preview of the firing report. We're going to fire a few shots at the 50-foot target to show you what the M9 can do. Not too bad. You saw some flies. We've